he came up with this conclusion in the middle of the second trial of Ray Buckey. We called the district attorney's office. He sent an investigator named Perez out who argued with Dr. Stickle that there were no tunnels in the school. The authorities ignored the fact that we did find these tunnels. In other words, the children, in my opinion, were telling the truth. At least they were telling the truth about the tunnels. Now, other activity that the children claimed they were involved in or were exposed to were adults in robes chanting with candles. They talked about the burning and the sacrifice and the murder of babies in ceremonies, obviously a satanic ceremony. This is just a touch of what I've been involved in. I might also mention that in the late 1980s, I was actively involved in what's called the Franklin cover-up. This is a case where children were flown from Sioux City, Iowa to Washington, D.C. for sex orgies with congressmen, senators, and it goes all the way, at that time, up to the White House. And this case, again, was covered up. I've written letters to the Attorney General of the United States, to the Attorney General of the state of Nebraska, and documented this. And as a matter of fact, I have a report that contains details concerning this case, and it ties into an organization in Washington, D.C. known as the Finders. This is my report on the Finders. And this not only is documented out of my investigation with former State Senator John DeCamp, it's documented through U.S. Customs. In 1987, the Tallahassee Police Department received a phone call anonymously from an individual who said that there were two well-dressed men and a number of children in the park. The police went down, arrested the man, looked at the children. The children didn't even know how to use toilets or telephones. They traced the case to Washington, D.C. to the Finders. And in researching this, and as a result of the information furnished by the U.S. Customs agent, in fact, I have the U.S. Customs agent report here, it was noted that the Finders, an organization established in the early 1960s, was involved in kidnapping children. And I have the last paragraph of the last page of the Customs report in front of me. And let me just read this portion to you. This Customs agent arrived at the scene of the Finders on April the 2nd, 1987. And he was told by the Metropolitan Police officers who had conducted searches there through search warrants that the circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the Finders had become an internal CIA matter. The Metropolitan Police report has been classified secret and was not available for review. I was advised, this is the Customs agent, that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior and that the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence Division, that's Division 5, had directed the Metropolitan Police Department not to advise the FBI Washington Field Office of anything that had transpired. The Washington Field Office is the investigative branch of the FBI in the Washington, D.C. area. So this was not only withheld from the public, it was also withheld from their own agents within the organization. The kidnappings of children, the missing children in this country, is a very serious matter. I have in front of me a July 1982 Reader's Digest article about missing children. And this article states that 100,000 children disappear every year and are never heard from again in the United States. Now, we're not talking about runaway teenagers. We're talking about 2, 3, 4-year-old children. I have personally made formal complaints to the FBI on this case on 6 occasions and been ignored. By the way, let me also show you a headline in the Washington Times, which is dated June 29, 1989. And this headline points out the homosexual probe ensnarls officials of Bush and Reagan. What better documentation do you need? Again, I have been ignored. And it's inconceivable that a person with my credibility a person who was at one time was one of the top executives in the FBI, would file a complaint with the FBI and be ignored. So we have a cover-up in Pearl Harbor, Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Ruby Ridge, Waco, World Trade Center 93, Oklahoma City 95. We have 9/11 in 2001. And then I personally go out in the interim and during that same period and develop information about criminal activity that's taking place in this country, and I am ignored. Well, in order to understand the situation, let me tell you a little about Promise software. Promise software was a computer that was developed by Bill and Nancy Hamilton out of Washington, D.C. It was able to gather together and contain information, compile information concerning law enforcement, the court procedures, the judge activities, of course, as far as the courts were concerned, and other activity at various levels, all levels, basically. What it was an intelligence gathering device, and the Department of Justice leased this from the Hamiltons for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, they refused to pay the Hamiltons the $10 million that they owed to the Hamiltons. The Hamiltons went into court, bankruptcy court, filed a lawsuit. They won in court, but the court said, you're in the wrong court, you need to go to the district court. And of course they had spent over $1 million at that point and couldn't continue to carry the case out at another level. Now, after the Department of Justice refused to pay the Hamiltons, they gave the Reagan administration, through former Attorney General Meese, gave the Promise software to a fellow named Earl Bryant. Earl Bryant's former owner of the United Press International. Bryant then took this computer, Promise software, sold it to the Canadians, the English, the French, and the Israelis. And what the British, Canadians, French, and Israelis didn't know at the time was that we had put a trap door in that computer, so all the information, intelligence information that those countries gathered was also available to us, unknown to those countries, of course. The person who put that trap door together was an individual named Michael Riconosciuto. Michael was an intelligence agent for a number of years, and the Brooks Committee in the 1980s, around 1990 actually, late 1980s, early 1990s, had a hearing. Michael was contacted and asked to testify about his involvement in installing the trapdoor into this computer. And he received a phone call, according to Michael, from a fellow named Vietnix with the Department of Justice. Vietnix told him, if you testify before Congress, you will be sorry. Michael refused, ignored the warning, and testified. 6 weeks later, he was arrested for drugs, tried, and sentenced to 30 years. Michael claims he was set up on the drug arrest. I am inclined to believe that's true. This is a first offense, drug offense. You get 30 years. Michael's only mistake there was that he was testified and told the truth. I have been Michael's investigator of record for 20-some years. I met Michael in 1982. And for a year and a half prior to 9/11, I attempted to get in and see Michael in prison. I was not allowed in the prison to visit him at that time, at any time during that period. I was finally able to gain access to Michael in January of 2003. And as a matter of fact, I spent 3 days with Michael, January 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And Michael gave me information, and the reason he'd been trying to get to me and give me this information about his involvement, or his development, actually the development, not involvement, the development of information concerning terrorist activity in America. Michael told me at that time that in January, February 2001, he, through his sources, had gained information that there would be terrorist attacks in the United States by the Arabs. Now, you have to understand, the question arises, how could Michael develop this information while he's in prison? Well, in the spring of 1986, I was contacted by a high-level official in the Reagan administration, asked if I could help the Afghan rebels in their fight against the Soviets. I contacted Michael, knowing Michael's contacts within the community, intelligence community, and his knowledge of weapons. And Michael and I met with an individual from the State Department / CIA, and there was a fourth person there, Tim Osman. We later learned that Tim Osman was Osama Bin Laden. As a result of that meeting, I actually didn't do much. I just introduced the parties, and then I dropped out of the picture. But as a result of that meeting, Michael continued and ended up furnishing the surface-to-air missiles to the Afghan rebels that defeated the communist Soviets. Now, you have to understand this also. This was a patriotic move by me because we were fighting the communists. Bin Laden was our ally, our friend at that time.